Rich Shea here with another unboxing. This time, Uwe Rosenberg's Hallertau. Well, one thing to notice, expert level. They're not kidding. I'm a big fan of many of Uwe's games, Agricola, the new Agricola, Gates of Leon, which I recommend is a great solitaire game, Caverna. I like Agricola better, but a lot of people like Caverna better. A lot of these games are not simple, which is something I like about them. This is the first one to actually, I think, be labeled expert level. So let's look in and see what we think. Alright. From Lookout Games, Uwe Rosenberg, Hallertau, as I guess, the first place, or the place that's been growing hops for beer longer than anywhere else. So, first, the instruction booklet. Oh, there's even a card sleeve size recommendation, and then you need 7 packs because there's a bunch of cards. Alright, so let's put this down here, you can see it. Lots of color. The rules require careful reading. You'll see there'll be fields, the first player marker, tools, the worker placement area, a bunch of cards, 336 cards in 4, 8, 9, 10 decks, and then 6 extra cards. A lot of wooden components. Workers. Workers don't belong to players. You're playing worker placement, but they're sort of generic workers, and you just have a certain number at the beginning of your turn. Sheep, flax, barley, hops, rye, clay, hides, milk, meat, and wool. Anyway, the players then get their own boards. This is where you'll place your fields, and fields change value. I guess we'll talk about that later. The turns are here. They're covered up by cards that you reveal and put into your hand to play later, you hope. Then there are 5 different craft buildings, a jewel box, a jewelry token, player aid card, and some boulders. So this is your community center board, which you unfold, and your community center tile, which, in sort of a strange thing, the community center will start here, and it has a little window. And there are a number of workers you get, and then victory points as you try to slide your community center over by moving the 5 crafts over and having the building follow after. So, because it's complicated, let's bring this up a tiny bit. Oh, that's better. Okay, there's an overview page, okay, talking about moving the community center, how to play cards, which you can play at any time, breeding sheep, and also having your sheep die before the end of the game, cultivating crops, where when you harvest off a field, you get all the crops based at that level, 5, 4, 3, or 2, but then the field goes down 1, and at various times in the game you can bring the fields back up. So it's like you let them lie fallow and they improve, but if you keep using them over and over, you wear out the soil and you get less crops per harvest. Then the way worker placement works is most of the worker placement spots have 3 sets. There are some limits. The first one, you put 1 worker in, take the action, but if that's full, you have to use 2 workers to take the action, and if they're both full, you have to use 3 workers to take the action. Now, another thing that happens in the game is in a lot of games that use a mechanism like that, at the end of each round, all the workers come off. That's not what happens here. It's a little bit variable, and it depends on the number of players, how quickly they clear. Anyway, so the common display, stacks of the 4 decks that are in use during the game, and the way it works is I think there are 3 or 4 of each kind of deck, varying in either which resources they prioritize for one set of decks and have difficulty out of play for another set of decks. And then in your personal display you have a jewelry box, and you use the ring here to count how much jewelry you have. Your hand of cards, the crafts buildings here, which during the play of the game you'll try to slide them over, having to both spend resources and eventually clear rocks out of the way with tools. If you really get them far enough, these victory point values will appear on the left, and then you score them. When they're on the right, they don't mean anything. But also, when you've moved everything along a whole column, then your community center moves a column. early on, this just increases the number of workers you have per round. Later, it turns into victory points, like a lot of victory points. These cards both mark the rounds, but also, although you can't see them until you get them, the card will come off each turn, and then in the subsequent round you'll be able to play the card maybe, because the cards vary in what they do. Okay, and this tracks what you have. You have a marker for each kind of good, and you can get more, but when the markers are in the spaces, they represent 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of the goods. You can always make change, but that way it's both convenient because it shows the productivity of fields that are in that row, and also how many goods there are when you put the goods token in there. So you need fewer goods tokens to play the whole game instead of one for every single one. Okay. Then there's discussion of how resource sources work, which are cards, fields, goods, jewelry, sheep. There's a lot of things going along. Each round, 6 rounds, each round has 10 phases. A lot of the phases, you'll see the ones in black, are just housekeeping. You just do what it says. But in actions and progress, that's where the players make decisions and decide what to do. Okay, so how to remove workers, how you get your workers, how to collect income that you might get, and then you alternate taking actions. And actions might move the first player marker around. What's different here is there's 4 spaces, and each could be used more than one time if you expend the workers. So in a round, the first player token could move around 8 times, so who knows who has it at the end. Then there's all the different actions that you can do. New cards, having your empty fields improve their potential productivity, and then progress, where you try to move your village house and the guild pieces along, where you pay different amounts. Like for carpentry, you pay clay or rye, and there are rules like you must pay more clay than rye. So, and the cost to move along is the number of the round. So the first round you'd pay a clay to move the carpentry. The second round you'd have to pay 2 clay. The third round you could play 2 clay and 1 rye, because you need 3. But because of this rule, you can't even use rye until you're paying 3. Okay, and the rules are slightly different for each of the 5 craft buildings. Okay, then there's also a thing that happens when the turn changes. It tells you what to do. Okay. Then the community center, which gets dragged along behind the craft halls in revealing more workers. It's kind of tiny, but okay. Then there's some moderately complicated discount rules. When you pay with more than one kind of good, but you still have to follow the rules, you get a discount of 1. If you pay with 3 different kinds of goods, which is I think the most you can, you get a discount of 2. But you still have to follow the rules, so you might have to do some math. I think that's the most expert thing in the whole thing, other than remembering to do all the phases correctly. Okay. Then there are boulders. Boulders get in the way of moving your craft buildings along, and you have to use tools to move them. Now, one thing in this game, when you use the tools to move them, the tools don't go away. You still have them. So you want to accumulate enough tools to be able to do that. You just put them aside, but then you get them back. Except on the last turn, where they do go away, they get worn out if you use them. And sometimes you have to make a decision, because maybe you have a card that gives you victory points for tools left at the end of the game. Anyway, jewelry, instead of playing goods, you can play exactly 1 jewelry to move 1 building, 1 space along. You still need the tools to move the boulders out of the way, but there you go. Then you go through that and end the round. So one of the things you can do at any time is reorganize your goods. As long as they add up to the same number, you can have tokens be the way you want. Because sometimes, in order to do something, you need to have 1 of the good available to pay. Okay, so you might want to do that. And you can do that any time before you start an action or after you've ended an action. And you can always play cards from your hand, even during another player's turn. As long as you can play multiple cards and resolve them in the order that you want. Now, one of the things with cards is sometimes there are conditions like this, where this is a book condition, where either the game state or your state has to match a certain thing, but you do not expend the things that you're using. So in this case, if you have a wool and 3 sheep, then you'll be able to do what the bottom half of the card has. Sometimes you have to spend things. There's a little arrow chevron thing that shows that, but also instead of this book icon or background, there'll be like this out in the open market icon, that background, sorry. Okay. Then there's things that happen. Sometimes effects happen during certain phases. Sometimes there are multiple states that give you multiple choices. One of the ways it works is, let's say you have the 3 pieces of jewelry. That corresponds to 1 tool, but if you wanted to, you could take the less hard to get item that's to the left, but you have to have 5 to choose from all 3. Okay. Sometimes there are phase restrictions on when you can do things or check certain conditions. So that part can get kind of complicated too. Gaming and scoring, your community center might show a point value, your craft buildings might show a point value, your sheep are worth 1, your jewelry's worth 1, and then everything else you add up and divide by 5. Okay. The cards you play, many of them will have point values. Some of them will have a lot, but those of course are harder to play. Then there's a solo game, tips for your first play. Can you mix the decks together? No, don't, says Uwe. They're meant to be used individually and they work together. Then, starting on page 14 and going to the end of 24, there's 10 pages of glossary, explanation of the cards, explanation of the board, and there. So now you see why it's for people who like complicated games. Well, let's dig into the parts. It's mostly goods. Here's a ball of wool, some meat. These are the workers in blue, hides, milk, I think that, oh, and clay, right? Then over here we have sheep, rye, hops, I think. No, or maybe that's, yeah, hops, and I think barley. Should check that more carefully. It's barley. Ooh, I remember that correctly. And the blue things are flax. Why not? Some extra bags, scoring pads, not super premium or anything, and then all the cards. I'll open this deck. These are the quadrant cards. They're used when you have fewer than 4 players, and we'll see the board's actually divided into quadrants, and the way the workers come off and is going to vary depending on which of these 6 cards come up, although they'll all come up eventually, and they each get used 1 time in a game. These are the different decks of cards. The kind of deck is shown by this symbol. I think these are the house cards, farm cards. These are the ones that go on your turn spaces on your board. So they have similar backs, and you can see this one shows a cost. 5 rings. So these are the mostly endgame bonus cards. They vary a lot. You could get 14 points on this one, and 12 points with this one. But this one, let me find a terrible one here. And you draw them randomly. So if you don't like oh yeah, here we go. 2 points. Not as exciting, but a lot easier to get, right? 4 points for having 3 tools at any time. Oh no, paying 3 tools probably at the end of the game, right? Cards in play, pay 4 tools, so, and they probably go on for a while because there's 4 decks of 35 of those. And they're like any 2 cards from your hand to get a wool and draw 2 bonus cards. That's an important part of the farm cards, is you can turn them into more cards. And this stack is farms all the way down until, almost all the way down, of course. And these are bonus cards. The bonus cards, yep. And the bonus cards are things like, if you get them out during phase 4, you have obtained 1, 3, or 5 tools during this phase. Then you can play that to get another bonus card and up to 3 gateway cards. No, 2 gateway cards. So, and the last stack, I think, are the rest of the hundreds of cards. Now, a lot of times I sleeve Uwe games, but I'm not sure that it's really worth sleeving all these cards. Okay, so lots of gateway cards, and I think it's gateways down to the bottom. So it's lots of cards. Okay. So this is the fold up. So this is the worker placement board that's shared by everybody. As you can see, it's divided into 4 quadrants, which with fewer than 4 players, like, different things happen with removing workers at different quadrants. And each quadrant has a card draw section that is also lets you take the first player marker, so that can move around a lot. Okay, and you can see 1 worker, then 2, then 3. When you remove workers at the end of rounds, you start with the top, and you usually remove the top row that's filled in. Then the rest of the cardboard is here, and it's a reasonably thick cardboard, but not super thick. But to make these work, this is where the your village hall goes, and you can see the number of workers that you get each round shows here, and victory points at the end of the game shows through that window here. Then the boulders are actually placed. There are rules for moving boulders on and off the board and moving them back at the end of each round. And you can see here's your village hall, and you can, there's a little window punch out, so that's how you know to do that. Tool markers, fields, and an overview cardboard. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of those. And 4 sets of fields, goods, and things that players need. Stones, a start marker, your ring, your jewelry box, basically turn marker and card holder, and where you keep your sheep, which could end up in your stable if you get them to the end of the game, which is kind of tricky. And then the fields go here. The fields slide up and down. You can only have a maximum of 8 at any one time. Sometimes you'll get rid of fields and acquire new ones, and then your craft houses, okay? And the rule here is what you can use to pay to move them along. And then, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. We're now at the bottom. So there are also all the components. I'm looking forward to playing the game. I like his games a lot. Friends of mine who like his games and have played this say it's quite good. So that will be exciting. Thanks for watching. I hope you're all staying well, and pretty soon we'll be able to get together and play again with our friends. Bye for now.